What is going on, Comic Fam? It is your boy, the Bearded Comic Bro, and I am joined by comic creator Tony Fleecs. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Another bearded comic bro.
That's right. It's going to be a good interview when you have just two beautiful beards on screen. So,
More salt than pepper on this end now. You still have a nice youthful beard going.
yeah, but the camera's not showing it, but I'm getting a little bit of salt in there. So, having kids will do that to you.
Going on. Just a little brush in some dye. Fix
That's
it.
right. You got to get that men's hair care concealer.
My dad used to do that on his mustache. It was very shameful. Just one day he would just have this completely dark mustache.
You're like, So
you know what
you are the writer, but behind the comic Stray Dogs from Image, which is fantastic. And we're going to hop right into talking about that in just a second. But I want to know, I always like to know when I bring a creator on, how did you get into creating comics?
Well, I always made comics. I fell in love with comics, young, like everybody, I think. And at a certain point, I realized that like I was the kid in my class that could draw, and that like in elementary school. And then when I got to high school and junior high school, there were like a few of us that could draw. But I realized I could do like comic books or art projects for like English class or history class, or like they would have some assignment and it was just like, if you want to try something other than just like, they just didn't want to read a million papers,
Right.
And so they would be like, if you want to try something else, pitch it to us and maybe you could do that. So I ended up doing like comics in school all the time because it was just like, oh, they'll let me just do this as a comic book. So like that was a lot of my earliest work, if you will, was just sort of like,
that's awesome,
learning how to do comics by ripping off Rob Liefeld comics and turning it in as like a history report, about the Alien and Sedition Acts or whatever. And then I went to art school for animation because I thought that was like the way that you could make money, as like drawing cartoons. And but then halfway through that, I realized that like wasn't really the level of ownership or control that I wanted to have. Like what I really like about comics is that you could, even if like I'm drawing My Little Pony or Star Wars or something where I didn't write the script, I still have an insane amount of control over like how it looks and how it's presented. And in animation, when I was going to school for that, I could tell it felt like being a piece of something, like a part of a unit that makes the big grander thing. And I felt like I wouldn't thrive in that sort of condition. So then I started, like I got an art job, like a square job. And I did that for about 6 years. And while I was doing that, I started drawing comics, like short stories and pinups and stuff, indie comics, anthology stuff. And then I did a book called In My Lifetime that was a autobiographical comic that was just about a dipshit in his 20s in the Midwest. And the thing that was different about it was it wasn't like contemplative or shoegazy. It was just sort of like the sort of dumb stories that I would tell to my buddies at the bar or whatever. It was just sort of like funny things that had happened to me. So it was sort of lighthearted. And people dug that. And it sort of kicked off my career, as it were, I wasn't making a full living at it at that point, but it was enough that I could go to conventions and had a thing to pass around and people would start to know who I was.
Awesome.
That was in like 2006.
Okay. Wow. And you've been working on, well, you mentioned My Little Ponies, you mentioned Star Wars. So you've been working on a bunch of different properties since then. Since you're kind of
like licensed kids comics for the most part has been where I've been making my bones. And I did a book for Oni a couple of years ago called Jeff Steinberg, Champion of Earth. That was like a comedy sci-fi thing that was like a 6-issue series. But for the most part, I'm about to hit 50 issues of My Little Pony, which feels like a substantial enough. It's not in a row, so it's not like a Jack Kirby situation or anything, but 50 is a lot for anybody to draw a comic book.
So, wow, that's so crazy. Like just the expansiveness of that. Well, you did a lot of art in those books, but now you're kind of doing more of the writing side here with Stray Dogs. So if people for some reason are watching this podcast and has never read Stray Dogs yet or doesn't know what it's about, what's your pitch, your elevator pitch for Stray Dogs?
Like the short version is it's like Silence of the Lambs meets Lady and the Tramp. It's like a horror movie dressed up like a animated cartoon about dogs. But the longer version is there's a serial killer who takes this is a little spoilery. He takes his victims' dogs as trophies, and the dogs don't have great memories, and so he just has this house full of dogs that they think they just live this idyllic sort of like dogs in a farmhouse, just being friends with each other life. But what actually is going on is that they're all trophies from murders. And a new dog shows up and says like, hey, this is what's happening. And she has to convince all the rest of them that that's what's going on.
Yeah. And it is crazy because, yeah, I've seen it like mentioned, like you said, Silence of the Lambs, Lady of the Tramp. I think on the back of issue 1, it's Secret Life of Pets and 7. I told people it reminded me of like Secret Life of Pets and Memento because
Very
of the
good,
mind.
Yeah.
But let's just say any one of those analogies, if you're not hooked on that by that, I don't know what will hook you then.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of like if you like dogs or if you like murder or if you like a combination of any of those things, it's a pretty people asked in other interviews I did like, well, who would you recommend this to? And I was just like everybody, I guess, like it's not like a niche thing.
Right.
It's like if you've seen a Disney cartoon and you're an adult, this one, like you shut.
Yeah, it's funny. You're like, oh, everyone loves dogs. Oh, and if you don't, murder. It's it's something for everyone.
Must be some sort of maniac, so murder.
So it's gonna fit something for it. So great. It's a great issue 2's out. I think issue 3's final order cut off was just a little bit ago. So like I know this is I think it's a 5-issue series, right?
Yeah, it's 5 issues, and we're doing a free comic book day issue also, which is reprints issue 1, and then it has a 10-page prologue that's sort of like because it comes out, free comic book days in August this year, and the book will be wrapped up by then. So the free comic book day book is sort of like promo for the trade, like a teaser, read the first chapter.
Yeah.
But once you've read the full thing, the prologue, like if you haven't read it, free comic book day is like, oh, this builds a nice little mystery. But if you have read it, you're like, oh shit, that's a thing that I know about. So hopefully people will take that.
Absolutely. That'll be fantastic to get that for sure. To kind of get into that mindset. Where did this, because this is such a unique idea, like you said, like there's no target market. Where did this kind of idea come from?
I was watching Bates Motel, the show about young Norman Bates, and when I left the room, he was just there. Norman Bates was just having a day, and then I went to the bathroom. I came back, and Norman Bates had a puppy with him, and I asked my friends who were there. I was like, did he kill somebody and take their puppy? And they were like, no, that's not what happened. And I was like, oh, cool if that was what happened though. Like if there was a killer that took people's dogs, I don't think I've seen that. That's interesting. And then of course, like the longer I work on this, like I rewatched Silence of the Lambs a couple of weeks ago, and that killer has Precious, the dog that puts the lotion in the basket dog. And clearly he took that from the lady that lived in that house, I think. But just the idea of a killer who took trophies of dogs got into my head, and I started tumbling around like, what would that be if that was a story I told? And I didn't want to do it about the killer, and I didn't want to do it about the victims necessarily, and I definitely didn't want to do about detectives, just because that's so much work to figure out like detective talk and it's like when you write a super genius, you have to be smart enough to know like science stuff and stuff.
Right.
Wasn't smart enough for any of that. But then I was like, oh, I'm as smart as the dog though. And if I did it from the perspective of the dogs, and also from having done all these years of doing My Little Pony and like anthropomorphic stuff, and just my head is in that space already of just sort of like how animals act and move. And so once I thought like, oh, what if it was from the dog's perspective? Then the whole story just sort of started coming to me very quickly. Like, oh, this would happen, and then this, they don't have hands, so they couldn't open a door, like all that sort of thing. And so it's sort of, the idea came to me very quickly, and I knew that I didn't want to draw it myself, because the style I was looking for was like a very specific, looks like 90s animation style. And I knew Trish Forstner from My Little Pony conventions,
Okay.
and she has all this fan art and stuff, that she had a sketchbook that I bought, and she had all this stuff, um, that looked like that sort of style. And there was one specific drawing of a dog that I saw that I was just like, oh, she would be great at this. Like, she drew a dog that looked just like All Dogs Go to Heaven. And I was like, that's exactly what I want this to look like. So then I went and talked to her.
Yeah, the art is fantastic, and you're right. Like Trish's artwork it really does have that kind of like Don Bluth's early animation style from the '90s, like of Land Before
Yeah.
Time, American Tail, like those kind of that art. Like, so you hit the head, like nail on the head right there. Like, yeah, because her art is
Yeah. It's
fantastic.
very expressive and emotive. And just like, she does acting with their whole bodies, like their tails are part of the acting, or their ears and stuff, all this stuff that, like, I guess I feel like I might have thought of some of it, but like, she just so naturally does all of it. I described it the other day as like, her artwork is more like empathetic than my artwork,
Okay.
like it has like a connection to the emotion of the characters, that even though I've done a lot more comics than she has, like, she's newer to the business, but she just has this like innate skill of doing like emotions and understanding, and just sort of like adding to the story by putting uh by acting through the characters. She's just very good at it.
Yeah, and it's a really great artwork, which I think just then it follows with the storytelling so well then, because you both are telling the story so wonderfully, and I think it just meshes really well.
Yeah, thank you.
So you talked about like getting into the kind of the headspace of a dog. Did you do much research? Like, did you, or like, are you so familiar with dogs, like you knew about like how they, the memory loss and some of that things? Like, how was that kind of process a little bit more of kind of like, how would I do this if I was a dog?
Yeah. Now, when I first started thinking about it, I based that part of it just on my own dogs, just like on how they're forgetful, and they, like, you have to tell them things a million times before they figure it out. And then even then, like a week later, they'll forget it again. Um, but then I wanted to make sure I read up and make sure, because, you see videos of like, soldiers coming home from overseas, and their dogs are waiting right there in the same spot for them, like, they obviously have memories.
Right.
But I needed to figure out how to make it work for that memento aspect of it. Like,
Right.
if all the dogs just knew the whole time that this guy was a killer, like, it would just be a completely nightmarish, just be an awful situation. Like, they'd just be screaming all the time. So I had to get it to the place where where they feel like they live in a Disney cartoon. So I read up on some dog memory stuff, and I basically just stopped reading, like, confirmation bias. Like, when I saw enough that they were forgetful, I was like, that's good. I don't need to read any more. That's all I need. And so, for the purposes of this story, dogs' memories are, they remember important things. They remember what their name is, what their master looks like. Um, they remember like where the food is and where to go to the bathroom and stuff, but they don't remember, like in the book we say, like, they don't remember what happened on Tuesday. They just live a life.
Right.
So, sort of finding Dory-ish,
Yeah.
but I think she has a head injury. These are just they're just dumb dogs.
So you went about kind of creating this book. It sounds like you were the one that kind of like, you knew you wanted to get Trish on board with doing the art. Did you guys kind of come together to create this book and then present it to Image? How did you guys kind of get this book launched?
Yeah, I had been, well, like we said before, I work in licensed kids comics. That's like my day job, and I got to a point where I realized that I had to sort of make some sort of step, otherwise I would just stay doing this forever. And so I had started out writing my own stuff, and I wanted to get back to doing that, but I didn't have time to write and draw. So I figured I could start writing stuff and then find people to collaborate with, and do stuff. So I did this book, Time Shopper, a couple of years ago, that we put together, and it's coming out later this year. And then Stray Dogs was like the second in like the list of ideas that I had that I wanted
Yeah.
to get to. And so I'd sort of set up this workflow where I can work with friends and we sort of put a thing together and own it together. I always use the same, up until this point, I always use the same layout artist. My buddy Tony Rodriguez, who's like one of my closest friends, and the same colorist. And like I lettered the stuff myself, and then we just find a collaborator to co-create it with, and sort of like go through and design all this stuff and come up with the characters. And so like when I reached out to Trish, I had like, this is what the story is, and sort of like skeleton idea of what the characters were, you know, like,
Right.
there's like a suave, cool dog who's like a Billy Joel from Oliver and Company. And then there's like a scared little dog who's like our main dog. And there's an old dog, you know, but like, we don't know what they look like or what kind of dogs they are. So we just sort of started kicking ideas back and forth, and like would go on like dog breed sites. And Trish is a dog person too. Like I have dogs, and Trish has a dog. She's got an Alaskan Malamute who looks like the dog Roxanne from the book.
Okay.
And so we just started like kicking ideas back and forth. And then once we got the characters, then I always like, at that point, I knew I was going to do the whole story. I didn't know who was going to publish it or whatever, but like, just for me to get motivated enough to do even that much, I have to just commit to like, well, I'm going to do this. So we just picked out the pages from the first issue that would tell a story in a pitch, you know, like the dogs being alone, you know, in the house, and then the new dog shows up, and then cut forward to the flashback where the new dog remembers what happened, and then the new dog tells the other dogs that this what happened. So just like these few pieces. And I'm friends with Kyle Higgins, who does that book Radiant Black. But he did a bunch of Power Rangers stuff and a bunch of other image books, Cowl, and Hadrian's Wall, and all these things. And I have a lot of friends in comics, and they always go like, "Oh, you should just pitch that to Image." And I would just go like, "Yeah, of course I should, but who am I?" You know, like there's not another, you know, My Little Pony artist that they're just like, "Please come do a book at Image," you know, like even the really successful ones. So, but he was like, "Well, listen, like I told him about this thing at like a New York Comic Con when I was just coming up with the story, and he loved it." And he was like, "Well, I know the guys at Image, and so when you have something to show, give it to me and I'll show it to him." You know, because like he just texts with them and stuff. Like it's a whole different level than what I got going on. And so I was like, "Oh yeah, what an incredible, thank you." But still I put together like this very tight pitch and like spent forever on the words, and like would send it to friends like, "Hey, does this look all right, dear Eric Stevenson?" You know. And then they were like, "Well, he doesn't like to be called full, maybe just dear Eric," and you know, like down to the perfect. And that book Infidel by Aaron Campbell and Pornsack Pitchstow had come out, and they printed their pitch in the back, and it was a horror book. So I was just like, "Oh, I'm gonna study this pitch." Like I got crazy about it. And then I sent it to Kyle Higgins, and he was at Comic-Con, and he was like, "Dude, are you down here?" And I wasn't going down to the next day. And I was like, "I'm coming down tomorrow." And he was like, "Image wants to publish your book. I just showed them the pages. I haven't sent them the pitch stuff yet." And I was like, "Wait, I didn't have to write all that stuff?" And he was like, "Yeah, just, you know, bring that just in case. But yeah, they want to do it." So it was very easy, but it was one of those sort of like, it helps to have somebody give you a leg up. But yeah, I guess the concept just sort of sold it. It's one of those, it's like I feel cocky saying it's a great concept, but I also will say that I don't have another one of those. Like I don't, there's not a second great concept like that in my, you know, my arsenal that I'm going to bring out next. Like I just have weird ideas, and this weird one happens to be very commercial.
You know? And we are grateful for this weird idea then.
You're welcome.
So you obviously we know about your, you know, your love for dogs. You obviously you seem to at least have a love for horror too, with watching Bates Motel, all the horror variant covers that are coming out with this. What are like, what's your go-to like favorite horror movie then?
Well, like the scariest one for me is The Exorcist still. Like that one just still really fucks with me. But I will watch literally anything. I don't like them when they're corny necessarily.
Okay.
Like people love like Evil Dead 2 is their favorite Evil Dead. And I'm more of an Evil Dead 1, even though it's still a little goofier, but Evil Dead 2 it sort of crosses the line. It's fun, but I don't know, it doesn't feel like it's not the vibe that I'm looking for necessarily. That's sort of heresy. But
Yeah.
that's just how I feel. But like I have Shudder. I'll just go through Shudder. I've been doing a lot of like Italian horror and Italian giallo lately. I've seen almost all of the Dario Argentos, but I've sort of go back through and rewatch some of them. Or like I didn't realize he'd done like those Masters of Horror episodes, that show that was on like Showtime or whatever. So I dipped back in on those, and that sent me down a rabbit hole.
You just went completely down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, but yeah, I like going on little journeys like that. I like the Romero zombie movies a whole lot. Like I think they're like 3 perfect movies. So yeah, I mean, I like all kind of.
Yeah. So just if it's horror, you're in. You're going down.
Yeah, it's an easy sell for me, and I'm not even like snooty. Like people go like, yeah, I don't like torture porn, or I don't like handheld. Like I'm just like whatever. It's fine by me. Is it scary? I'd like to see it. So and also I'm sort of have the privilege of being just like a straight white guy, and so realizing that I'm in my privilege, like I can watch like I Spit on Your Grave type shit, and I'm just like, it's horrible, but it's still scary. Like it's still a thing that I can watch without having it be traumatic for me because I have
Right. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. So that makes it. Yeah, that does for sure. So did you have a say in the variant covers that you guys were putting out for the books? Like you're like, I wanted this one, I want this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's Image. We have say over everything. It's basically like we just send it to them and they put it out. They early on we had discussions about should we do variant covers, and should we do horror movie poster variant covers? And I was hesitant at first because part of me was just like, well, we should just have the book speak for itself. Like everything that comes out of this should be just stray dogs, and like it just we don't have to lean on anybody else. But Kat Salazar at Image PR was like, well, if you do the horror posters, first of all, a retailer friend of mine had said like those movie posters sell like crazy. So that's because you're coming out and nobody knows who you are. If they don't read My Little Pony comics, that might be something. But Kat was like, the premise being so weird, this sells it real easy. If it looks like Silence of the Lambs already and a cartoon, then you don't have to say like, oh, it's like Silence of the Lambs but a cartoon. Like it just says it right there. So that I thought was really smart, and also I could make money off of it at the same time. So I was like, all right, sold. We'll do that. So we just
it makes it smart. You're right. It is really smart because I remember I had friends that were sending me like with no context. They were just sending me the cover of the Silence of the Lambs movie poster cover, and I'm like, and it was a dog on, and I'm like, what is this? I'm like, I have no idea what this book is about, but I'm in. Like that was I think my initial response. I'm like, I didn't read anything. He literally just sent me the cover, and I'm like, I'm in. I'm putting this down. So it worked.
Tell your friend thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Shout out. Yeah, we just sort of went through and picked, like that one was obvious. And then Pet Sematary is the issue 2 one that seemed pretty obvious. Cujo was one that we didn't do, and a lot of people were like, "Are you gonna do a Cujo?" But the poster just kind of sucks. Like it's not like you. If I ask you to think of what the Cujo poster looked like right now, I don't think you could imagine it. It's just like a fence that says Cujo on it.
Yeah, so, I wouldn't be able to.
Not as good. But yes, and then it was just sort of like, oh, what are my favorites? Trish, she's more animation than horror, so she doesn't have like a favorite horror movie poster that she wanted to do. So I just sort of got to go wild and just
okay.
Like, the number 4 one is my favorite one because it's Dario Argento and Lamberto Bava's Demons, which is like an Italian horror movie where this movie theater gets possessed by demons, and the people watching this, they go to see this horror movie and they all get possessed by it, and then they go and run amok. And it's a very obscure, I mean, it's not obscure if you like horror movies, but amongst the other ones, which are just like sort of mainstream, this one is just like, which one's that? And that's my favorite one, just because it came out so weird.
That's awesome. So how was this then for you? You know, doing a lot of art typically to then be more on the writing side of this and giving up the art duties.
Yeah. It's been cool. Like it's just nice to be able to sort of set it and forget it sometimes, like we just get it to a certain point and then send it off to layouts and then, send it off to Trish and then it comes back and I look at it and I send it to the colorist. Like being the writer in create your own comics, like if you don't have a editor or if you haven't hired like a manager or project manager or something, like you often end up being sort of like the Grand Central, where just like you're in charge of traffic, like things come through and you route it over here and route it over there. So I have eyes on it all the time. And when we do covers, like I still work on those, like we sort of are very collaborative about those. And we're collaborative about some of the other stuff. It's neat because we work on Dropbox because we're all over the country. And so Trish will just be drawing on the pages on Dropbox. And like it just happened right now, like a notification popped up that's just like, oh, issue 5, page 13, she made a change on it. And so she'll just hit save and I'll be able to see what's going on. Which I think for somebody that has been doing comics forever and doesn't want to be bothered, like they would never do that. But she being newer and just sort of like we have sort of like a mentor mentee situation.
Yeah.
I don't think she would be offended me saying that. I feel like she said stuff like that. I feel weird about it anyway, but like, because we're co-owners, co-creators on this, but also like, I've done a bunch of this stuff. So, we'll just sort of be able to give notes back and forth and it's great. So on the one hand, it's nice to not have to do the hard part of it, because that is definitely the hardest part of comics is sitting around drawing them. But it's cool that I still have some level of connection to it and then just that we're collaborative.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like, because usually it's when I have a creator on, it's one or the other. Very rarely are they both sides in both projects. And so I just wanted to kind of get behind the curtain a little bit there and see that. So that's cool.
Well, that's sort of like the ultimate goal is just to be able to do all of it myself, like at this point, like the only way I could afford to like make a living and do creator owned comics is to just do the one part of it, like either just draw it or just write it or whatever. Just write it is much easier because it only takes a little bit of time. But eventually, like once I sort of have a few of these under my feet and I can have a library and the track record and can just afford to draw my own stuff and write it myself, like I want to just be able to do, Jeff Smith shit.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So, well, Tony, thank you so much for just taking some time. But before we go, you have a Kickstarter coming up here pretty soon. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. It's this book I mentioned it earlier. It's a sci-fi comedy book that I did called Time Shopper. Me and my buddy Christian Misi did this book together, and then Tone on layouts and colors by Brad Simpson, just like Stray Dogs. And we solicited it and we had like a bit of a promotional push for it at the end of 2019. Like it was supposed to come out through Diamond. We had a small press publisher. And then COVID happened. And at the same time, there was some other fuckery is too harsh a word, but it was just sort of like, some goofs.
Yeah.
Not necessarily on our end. And basically we got the rights to it back and we were just like, you know what, let's just kickstart this thing and send it right to the fans. And then we also found a way to get it to retailers, but it's called Time Shopper. And it's about a guy that gets a job traveling in time, and they give him like a time machine and they give him assignments and he's supposed to go fix history's greatest disasters. So like warn the Titanic, kill baby Hitler, warn JFK, all this stuff. And they give him a suitcase full of money and they say like, just for in case you need supplies or whatever. And then they send him back in time. And when he gets back in time, he's just so startled by how cheap everything is that he gets distracted and doesn't do any of the stuff he's supposed to do. Instead, he just goes shopping in time. And then hilarity ensues. So it's very different from the dog murder comic that I have out right now. But it's just like a one-off. It's going to be European format hardcover.
Okay.
Just like one-off graphic novel called Time Shopper, and we're gonna kickstart it right around the same time as Stray Dogs #5 is coming out. So
Okay.
I'll sort of have something else happening right after.
That's so cool. Like, I'm in. So I'm
Cool.
excited for that for sure.
Good.
That's
Thank you.
awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for just taking some time to talk about comics. If people want to follow along with what you're doing, make sure that they know when your Kickstarter comes out. How can people stay connected to you?
Best way is follow me on Twitter or Instagram. Both of those are just at Tony Fleecs, Fleecs. If you don't do social media, you can go to straydogscomic.com, and there's a mailing list on there that you can just sign up for that, and I'll send you information when I got a new issue coming out or a new book. Um, yeah, that's
Awesome.
probably the easiest way.
I was going to say all the links that you just said are going to be in the description of this video below. So make sure when this is over to click on those and
Sweet.
follow along. So
And then Stray Dogs #3 comes out April 21st. And we just found out today that issue 2 sold out. So we're doing a second printing of issue 2. I would imagine that'll probably be on the same day,
okay,
but hopefully it's, I don't know. We're still getting the details all figured out.
that's awesome.
But yeah, thanks. That's exciting.
It
You're the
just, I
only
mean,
person.
that just is a testament right there that people are really digging the book. And I know I'm one of
Yeah,
those.
it's been crazy. It's definitely a real switch from, like people like My Little Pony and Transformers and Star Wars comics and stuff, but they like that because they like My Little Pony and Star Wars and Transformers. Like it's definitely crazy to have it be for something that you just invented by yourself with your friends.
Yeah. Well, real quick, how was that? Like going from doing all licensed property to now kind of really getting to create your own characters and the worlds. Like, how was that switch for you?
I mean, like I said earlier, the part of comics that I like more than other things is like the freedom of it. And even working in licensed stuff, like there's a pretty big degree of freedom. And so just at this point, just being able to do whatever we want is, who doesn't want that? That's great.
Right.
It's like exactly what you want as an artist is somebody to just go like, yeah, go ahead and do whatever you want and we'll put it out and people will buy it.
That's awesome.
So yeah, that's been great.
That's so good. Well, Tony, thank you so much just again for taking some time to talk comics with me. Like I said, all the links to everything to follow along with Tony and what he's doing are listed below. With that being said, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.